Good morning, everyone, and welcome to University Unitarian Church. My name is Jon Luopa. I'm one of the ministers here and delighted to welcome you into our space this morning. Also, a word of welcome to those who are worshiping with us on the live stream this morning here in the Seattle area and in lots of areas all over the country. Glad to have you all with us. Just a reminder that as we are in the building, that we remain masked at all times, and you are invited to coffee and conversation after the service in Nathan Johnson Hall. You may bring your coffee outside if you'd like. If you're sipping coffee in the NJ Hall, we ask you to pick up that mask and then put it right back down again. It's a pain, I know it, but it's a safety measure, and I'm grateful for your cooperation. Anyone who may be new to this church or Unitarian Universalism is invited to an information session after the service this morning downstairs in the Dix room. We offer this every week after each service. And those who are members of Camilla's Circle, which is our legacy society, and others who are interested in learning more about that are invited to join us in the Emerson room downstairs at 12:45 today. You may also access this by Zoom, and there's more information on our website about that. And our young adults will meet this afternoon from 12:30 to 1:15 in the Servetus room. And if you are between the ages of 18 and 35, you're invited to join the group for conversation and games and the joy of just being with each other. These are my announcements. Let us begin the service this morning with our prelude.
I call us to worship this morning with these words from the Reverend Nathan Ryan. Be it real or metaphor, whatever is in your backpack or your briefcase or your purse that you brought into this sanctuary that is weighing you down, leave it behind. Whatever you are carrying that is keeping you distracted or caught up in shame or guilt or hopelessness, leave it behind. If you need it, it will be there when we're done, but for just this hour, let it go. Come into this place with open hearts. Come into this place with a soul that has remembered how to be tender again. Come into this place with a renewed hope for this world. Come into this place, ready to build a world we've always been worthy of and have always dreamed of. Welcome to worship this morning. Welcome to University Unitarian Church. It is good to be here together. Would you please rise now in body or in spirit, enjoying in our doxology, followed by hymn number 317, We Are Not Our Own. And as a reminder, we are not singing from our mouths for safety, but expressing from our hearts.
Come on.
Our church sits on the unceded and ancestral territory of the Duwamish tribe, people who have been here since time immemorial and who continue to live, work, and honor this land named for Chief Seattle. In recognition of the painful histories of colonization and in support of the tribe's continued work to retain their culture and vitality against great odds, the Social Justice Steering Committee nominated Real Rent Duwamish as our second Sunday Plate recipient. Members of the steering committee will be available downstairs to answer questions if you would like to learn more, sign up for a trip to the Longhouse, or express your support for Real Rent. I know a number of members of UUC are already individual real renters, and there's a possibility of organizations also becoming a Real Rent organization. So if you'd like to learn more about that, please do stop by and connect with some members of the Social Justice Steering Committee. In the following video, we'll give you a little more context to the story of Real Rent.
The Duwamish tribe are a treaty tribe. We signed the Treaty of 1855, but we've gotten basically nowhere. We're not able to have the same kind of programs that other federally recognized tribes have through education, housing, social services. If you're not a federally recognized tribe, they don't feel like they have to work with you.
I'm a part of the Duwamish Solidarity Group, something like Real Rent, where people who are not indigenous to an area are sort of paying some kind of symbolic rent to the indigenous people of this land. It's just a tiny tip of an iceberg. When we're talking about colonial genocide.
My great-great-grandfather was a pioneer, and he chased the frontier multiple times throughout his life. So my family history is one of taking Native people's land repeatedly, and even though I didn't do that, I know that some of what my family used to send me to college came from the benefits that my family got from that. Trying to find a way to make peace with that, paying real rent made sense to me.
We are interested in the idea of having regular gatherings.
Since the federal government continues to choose not to do the right thing, there are 2,729 real renters. It's clearly shown it can make a huge difference.
It's really super important. It's basically given us a level of stability that the tribe hasn't seen in a very long time.
So as is our tradition with the second Sunday Plate each month, all of the monies collected this morning, either online or at the door of the sanctuary at the end of the service, will be going in support of Real Rent Duwamish and of the Duwamish Tribal Services. Would you please join me now in the words we say each week? This church is a community of ourselves. Its energy and resources are our energy and resources. Its wealth is what we share. When we contribute to the life of this community, we affirm our lives within it. At University Unitarian Church, for many years, there has been a care team which provides support to members during times of need or transition. And I had the honor yesterday to be in retreat with this care team and sit in a circle with people as we all were exploring the spiritual practice of deep listening and compassionate presence. And I'd like to share that if you are in need of some deep listening, or some compassion on this morning. It is hard to be a human being. There will be a care team member following service at the back of the sanctuary near the candles, who will be available to sit with you. Would you please join me now in the spirit of prayer and of meditation? Oh, and settling into this moment in time. Here and now, return to curiosity, rest, and compassion. And remember your courage. Here and now, moment by moment, and breath by breath. This is the place where life unfolds. Here and now, receive the grace of acceptance and of your own worthiness. Here and now, give the grace of welcoming it all. And here and now, be blessed by this moment, which is a shared moment. To these words, I invite you to add the silent meditations and prayers of your own hearts. Blessed be, and amen.
Our second hymn this morning is hymn number 1023. In the teal hymnal, words here on the screen. It's meant to be a round, and I think the musicians are going to, we're going to live vicariously through the musicians on this.
Friends, we could make such sweet
hard not to sing around, isn't it? Well, it came a little earlier this year. It comes every year. I do have bronchitis, but I do not have COVID. So as a result, I'll trust I can make it through the sermon this morning and do my duty and not stand in the back and greet you as you leave this morning, to protect you and to protect me. So I love you all. There you go. Let's go like that. Long before there was a place called Europe, and even long before Jesus of Nazareth was born, there were people living here on this continent, this North American continent, for at least 10,000 years. We are not sure exactly where they came from. There are many theories about that. But there were clearly people here for thousands and thousands of years. And if we think of Seattle and the greater metropolitan area, there were two groups of people that lived right here. Those that lived around Elliott Bay were called the people of the inside. And those who lived around Lake Washington were called the people of the lake. These two groups of people combined are what we know today as the Duwamish tribe. They were separate, related through marriages, but distinct groups of people. But once the Europeans came, they put them together and called all of them the Duwamish people. There were probably 17 villages of these folks in the Seattle metro area, and the closest one was here on Matthews Beach. Remember, the lake was 9 feet higher at the time, but they were on the beach front. In their backyard was the Meadowbrook Community Center, where we worshiped for 18 months. That's the closest village of the Duwamish to us here. They were engaged in extensive trade with many other tribes all over the Northwest, even into the interior of the country. And we see among them great fear for the constant raids of the northern tribes that would come down from the Alaskan and British Columbia coast, when they would come down here on slaving raids, looking to take back with them women and children. The Duwamish here, however, were a relatively peaceful people, unlike the Snoqualmies, who were an aggressive and warrior-based people. As early as 1680, we begin to see the bad effect of European diseases here along the western coast as smallpox made its way from Mexico all the way up the California coast and here into the Northwest. And smallpox would not stop being a problem in this area until 1862, when half of the native inhabitants of the region were killed as a result of the smallpox. But because of the abundant resources here in the Puget Sound and environs, where they had everything they needed for food and shelter and clothing and weapons and trade, they sat on prime real estate here and were the most immediately dispossessed at the time of the European settlement. So comfortable was life here for them, and of course there was starvation and famine at different times, but the natural resources were so incredible here in the Pacific Northwest that the Duwamish and others were considered one of the world's few sedentary hunter-gatherer societies. They came here and they stayed here for 10,000 years. Other than explorers who went up and down the coast, it was the Hudson Bay Company in 1833 that built Fort Nisqually down near Olympia for the purposes of the maritime fur trade. They came to get beaver and otter pelts for the European market, and trade goods with the native peoples here. And for the 30 years that the Hudson Bay Company was here, they lived a relatively peaceful coexistence with the native peoples, even intermarrying with some in some of those tribes. They were called the King George's men, and the native peoples had positive experience of them. So they weren't too terribly frightened when some started moving up from the Oregon Territory north into what is now the Puget Sound area. But these people were not British subjects, they were Americans, and they were called the Boston Men, and they were not on good terms with the native peoples that they encountered here, wanting more and more to steal their land and to push them around. So great was the migration of people from Oregon to Washington that in 1853 it became its own separate territory, the Washington Territory. It extended throughout the whole state and even into Idaho at the time. And because the federal government recognized it as its own territory, it of course had to have its own leader or its own governor. And Isaac Ingalls Stevens was appointed the first territorial governor of Washington in 1853. Once he was given that title, however, he insisted that another title be added to his portfolio, that he also be the superintendent of Indian affairs in the Washington Territory, and that for a particular reason, because his sole mission in coming to Washington was to consolidate the tribes and to push them onto reservations and to clear the land so that American settlers could come up and make claims. Who is this guy, Isaac Ingalls Stevens, after whom Lake Stevens is named? Stevens Way, Stevens Hall at the University of Washington, the Isaac Ingalls Stevens Elementary School on Capitol Hill. Who was this character? He was born in 1818 in North Andover, Massachusetts, north of Boston. He was a descendant of the first Puritan settlers in the Andovers in that area. Many illustrious forebears he had here in the 17th and 18th centuries. He was an enormously bright boy, actually a bit of a mathematical genius. Short of stature, only 5 feet 3 inches tall, he had a very troubled childhood. His mother died when he was 9, and his father remarried, and his stepmother was cruel to all of the children in the family, not her own. His father was a severe and demanding taskmaster. He was an anti-slavery Democrat and a fairly progressive human being for the first half of the 19th century, but he was no friend of his son, who was eager to get off the farm. He wanted to go to college, but his father thought that that would be a waste of time. Thank goodness for the intervention of an uncle of his who had political connections, who got him a place at West Point. He went to the West Point Military Academy, and he graduated first in his class in 1839. So advanced was he in mathematics that for the last 3 years of his college time there, he was the professor of mathematics for his fellow students. A greatly ambitious fellow. As soon as he graduated, he was appointed superintendent of fortifications in New England, which meant he had to build forts, lighthouses in Maine, in New Hampshire, in Rhode Island, in Newport, Rhode Island. That was a lucky one for him because he met his wife there. But he was tired as an engineer of being at home, and he wanted some adventure. So he enlisted in the army to fight in the Mexican-American War, a war his father had denounced, but a war he himself thought was a righteous cause. One of his fellow soldiers was Franklin Pierce, who later became President Franklin Pierce. And because of their friendship and his service in the Army, it was President Pierce who appointed Stevens the first territorial governor of Washington. He got a contract from the Great Northern Railroad to map a trail from Boston all the way across the country to what was Olympia in Seattle at the time. It took him a year after his appointment to get from one point to the other. A very controversial figure, strong-willed, intolerant of dissent. He imposed martial law on any who disagreed with him. He put the whole Pierce and Thurston counties under martial law because they weren't cooperating with him at one point, and he was known to jail anyone who disagreed with him. In the short time that he was here in Washington, he was the main driving force between 3 treaties that consolidated all of the tribes in the state onto reservations. The worst of them was the last one, when there was a lot of warfare in the eastern part of Washington. But he left everyone to their own devices on that one, was appointed to Congress, left Washington, went to Washington, D.C., but when the Civil War started, he was itching for glory again, so he re-enlisted in 1861 and was killed on the battlefield in 1862 at the Battle of Chantilly in Virginia. The soldier carrying the colors for the regiment had been shot, and the colors were about to fall to the ground, and he rushed to grab them before they hit the ground. His son, Hazard, who was also in the same regiment, had just been very badly wounded, called out to his father, "Help, help!" And he told him, "There are people in the regiment who can help you. I need to save the colors." So he saved the colors, and within a few hours was hit by an enemy bullet in the temple and was killed immediately. He became a war hero after his service here in Washington Territory. Who cares, some of you might say? Why am I telling you all about Isaac Stevens? He was a Unitarian. And his son Hazard later became the treasurer of the Olympia, Washington Church, and one of his daughters was active in the First Unitarian Church in Portland, Oregon. He grew up in a Unitarian household, so in some ways he was a kinsman. He was responsible for the treaties that forced all of the native peoples onto reservations. And you heard on the video from the Duwamish spokesperson of the Treaty of 1855, the Point Elliott Treaty, signed in Mukilteo. You see, the federal government was allowing anyone who could homestead to make a claim on land if they agreed to stay there before 1855. So when Stevens got here in 1853, he didn't have a lot of time to get these treaties in place to clear the room for others to come here. He wanted to consolidate all of these folks without consulting them, and he assigned certain tribes to live together with other tribes with whom they had never gotten along over many centuries. Most of these tribes had no formal political structure. So Stevens appointed a chief on his own as your chief for your tribe. You come to the treaty and you sign for your people. Well, this is what happened up in Mukilteo. He willy-nilly combined all kinds of folks. He didn't speak their language. He often didn't have an interpreter. He had made oral promises to the tribes that he never kept. And in an oral culture, that is a very great insult. It almost didn't make any difference, though, because whatever was written on the treaty, and the natives called them talking papers, the federal government didn't honor anyway. Certainly after the Civil War, they used the excuse of a bankrupt government to not compensate the native peoples for their land, nor to give them their supplies. These people conceded 54,000 acres to live on 4 reservations. The Duwamish people were not assigned their own reservation. They were lumped in with everybody else. Some of them went, some of them stayed here, some of them moved away. And one of those who did not move to the reservation was Chief Seattle of the Duwamish tribe. Doc Maynard, of early Seattle history, quite a colorful character himself, I can tell you that, was afraid for Seattle's welfare. So he raised the money quietly to take Seattle and as many Duwamish who were here in the city over to Port Madison on the Kitsap Peninsula so that they would be safe. And it was there in 1866 that Chief Seattle died. That was also the year that there was a federal petition to the federal government to give the Duwamish their own reservation. But the business leaders and the old families of Seattle decided to fight the petition and wrote a counter petition encouraging the federal government to completely ignore the request of the Duwamish people to have their own reservation. There has been no recompense for these people all of these years. Well, maybe none. In 1925, the federal government decided to give every Duwamish descendant $64. That's it, you see. Chief Seattle was one of the signatories of the Point Elliott Treaty. He was a big man. Actually, his nickname was the Big Guy. He was over 6 feet tall, and it is reported by some historians that after he signed the treaty, he stood to speak. And he went and stood next to Isaac Stevens, who was short, as you may remember, and he put his hand on his shoulder, and it is reported that he said something like this: "It matters little where we will pass the remnant of our days. They will not be many. The Indian's night promises to be dark. He will prepare solidly to meet his doom, as does the wounded deer at the steps of the approaching hunter. A few more moons, a few more winters, and not one of the descendants of the mighty hosts that moved over this broad land will be left. Once my people lived in happy homes and felt protected by the Great Spirit. Soon none will remain to mourn over the graves of a people once more powerful and hopeful than your own. But why should I mourn at the untimely death and fate of my people? Tribe follows tribe, nation follows nation, like the waves of the sea. It is the order of nature, and regret is useless. Your time of decay may be distant, but it will surely come, for even the white man cannot be exempt from the common destiny. We may be brothers after all. We will see." Historians dispute the accuracy of this speech. Some say that it's mostly authentic. Much has been lost in translation. I think it is a heroic speech, a courageous speech of a man at the end of his life who foresaw the fate of his people with the encroachment of the white settlers. But if there was a white interpolator of the speech who shaped some of the phrases in it, I think it is testimony to the fact that there was at least one or two sensitive white people who were struck by the poignancy of the moment and cast it into language that is bigger than all of us put together. The amazing thing is that the Duwamish are still here. And we are still here. We have been invited to consider participating in a program called Real Rent Duwamish, where we may decide to make a monthly contribution to the tribe to help with its expenses for health care and housing and education, funds that they would get if they were a federally recognized tribe, which they are not yet. I hope that we will do this. I hope that we will find a way to support them. But I hope that we will do it not with money alone. Throwing money at social justice causes is a really white thing to do. Because for many white people, they have too much money, or they certainly have enough resources where they can easily share it with other people. But if we engage in that kind of a transaction, I hope it comes from the fact that we have first been willing to become partners with the Duwamish people, and that we do that taking our cues from them, so that it's not only a monthly payment, but it forces us to do the deeper spiritual work of reparations and reconciliation, and asking ourselves, what do we owe those who went before us, especially those from whom we have stolen much, you see. This is important work for us to do, and I'm glad that we are engaged in it, for sure. And I cannot help but think so many, many times of the words of Adrienne Rich, who said, "My heart is moved by all I cannot save. So much has been destroyed. I have to cast my lot with those who age after age perversely reconstitute the world." We are at a significant hinge point in human history, where we are beginning with some fear and trembling to recognize how much has been lost in each other, in the world, and cannot be reclaimed. And our hearts are heartbroken with it. But we must not only despair, but we must find a way to cast our lot with those few people who are willing to find a new way of relationship, of beloved community, of reconciliation, stitched together by the strings of justice. It'll require some sacrifice on our part. It should require some sacrifice. But I think that it may also contain abundant joy and recognition that we are, after all, brothers and sisters, human beings, one of another, one family, living for a short time on a fragile planet. Let us go forward then with determination and courage and hopefulness and the solidarity of each other. So may it be. Amen. Our closing hymn this morning is hymn number 207, "Earth Was Given as a Garden." Now therefore, since the struggle deepens, since evil abides and good does not yet prosper, let us gather what strength we have, what confidence and valor, that our small victories may end in triumph, and the world awaited be the world attained. Amen.